Hey guys, I am about to head to my first paper standard tournament since I was in high school. It's been a while. You should be checking out your local game store, see if you can get into some paper standard, because standard right now is really cool with Bloomburrow out, and the format hasn't settled yet, so it's kind of a free-for-all. Plenty of good budget decks you could try, as well as a lot of cool new strategies, especially with all the cool prizing that they're doing for these store championships. You should check it out. But I have about 2 weeks until my store championship here, but I have 2 opportunities before then to go play some paper standard, test out my deck, and see if I need to make any tweaks, make sure I'm familiar with my deck, see what my local meta is kind of like, and I'm gonna be fully transparent, show you my deck in its current form, and I will warn you, it is not fully optimized. I am mostly building with cards I already had in my collection and picked up a couple cards I found in my LGS, and I also haven't taken Bloomburrow really into account yet. For instance, I'm playing a Golgari mid-range deck, and a lot of the new Golgari mid-range decks are playing the new case from Bloomburrow with Vraska has like an instant win. I am not doing that because that was gonna like double the cost of my deck. I don't have any of those cards lying around, but yeah, hopefully after getting a couple games in, I will be able to better optimize the list. But I want to go ahead and show you what I have now, and then we will jump forward and I will talk about any thoughts I have currently on adjustments I would make to the deck. Okay, so here is my first paper standard deck since like 2016, I think. First off, we have a 1 of Tiny Bones, 1 mana 1/1 Death Toucher. It's going to theoretically let us cast some stuff from graveyards. I only have the 1 of because it's all I had, and I'm not sure if it's going to end up making the final cut if I'm being honest, but I feel like a 1 mana Death Toucher that's sometimes going to give a little bit of replayability out of graveyard seems worth trying. We also have a play set of Deep Cavern Bats. This is going to be some hand disruption for our opponents, while also being a 1/1 flying lifelinker. Should be able to get us quite a bit of value, slow down our opponents a little bit, and with the lifelink buy some more time, which is especially helpful when we have a play set of Mosswood Dread Knights. It's a 2 mana 3/2 with trample that when it dies we may cast it from our graveyard as an adventure. It's an adventure. It says weaken for 1 and a black, draw a card and lose a life. And I have found in playtesting that this is one of the like top 2, top 3 most important cards in the deck, because it's going to help us get to the long game by keep looping it over and over again. So that is obviously going to cost us some life, but we should be able to gain some of it back with the Deep Cavern Bats and some of the other cards we have in our deck. We also have 2 Caustic Broncos. This is basically a Bob, except if we saddle it, which is kind of like crewing the vehicle, we can deal that damage to our opponent instead. Should be pretty interesting. I have a soft spot for these kind of cards, even though I'm not sure how good it's going to be. We also have 2 copies of Kaervek the Punisher. This is whenever we commit a crime, which is, targeting our opponents or anything they control or their graveyard, then we may pay 2 life to cast a black card from our graveyard. This is the one card in the deck I am most iffy about, so it will be interesting to see how they play. We also have 2 copies of Glissa Sunslayer. This is really just a great flexible creature that should be great in a lot of mashups. It's a 3 mana 3/3 with First Strike and Death Touch, which that by itself is already like fairly impressive, but when it deals combat damage to a player, we can either draw a card and lose a life, destroy a target enchantment, or remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. That's going to be really good against like planeswalkers and that one artifact that makes a growing creature over and over again. I'll have it up on screen, I can't remember what it's called, but it should be good in a lot of situations. And then we have a Preacher of the Schism. This is definitely one I would like to have more than 1 copy of in the deck. Not sure how many I want. It's a 3 mana 2/4 with Death Touch that when it attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, I create a 1/1 vampire creature token with lifelink, and when it attacks while I have the most life or tied for the most life, I draw a card and lose a life. So it's going to hopefully add some bodies to the board. It's hopefully going to draw a couple cards, and it's a 2/4 with Death Touch for only 3 mana. I only have the 1 of because I just found it lying around in my home. Hopefully I can find a couple more copies of it before my actual store championship. We also have a Shield of the Apocalypse. If you can't read Phyrexian, don't worry, I got you. 4 mana 4/5 with Death Touch. Whenever we draw a card, we gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. This is a card that is really expensive, so it feels kind of hard to go out of the way to play more than 1, but I already have this one in my collection. token, and apparently people aren't playing Shield Ridge as much as they used to, so maybe the 1-of is fine, but should be a very impressive card nonetheless. We also have 2 copies of Hostile Investigator, which is a 4-mana 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card, and whenever 1 or more players discards 1 or more cards, we investigate, which means we create a clue token. And this ability only triggers once, but this is still a pretty good ability. We don't have a lot more discard in our deck, but we have a couple other cards and a couple other cards in our sideboard that can cause discard. So for a lot of the time, this is just going to be a 4-mana 4/3 that makes 1 clue and makes our opponent discard 1 card, but it might do a little bit more along the way. We also have a single copy of Aklazah's Deepest Betrayal. This card does a lot. It's a little bit of card disruption. It might draw us a couple cards. It might add a couple 1/1s to the battlefield, and when it dies, it flips over into a land, and that land has an activated ability that we can flip it back to the creature, so it hopefully is recursive. This is another card that I would consider running a second copy of it if I can find one, but it's high up on the curve that maybe the 1-of is enough. Finally, topping out our creatures, we have Harvester of Misery, which is a 5/4 with Menace. When it enters, other creatures get -2/-2, so it's kind of a board wipe, but if we need to, we can also pay 1 and a black to just discard it to give a target creature -2/-2. So if we can't quite get to the 5 mana, something's got to go right away, we can do that. So it also acts as removal, as well as a kind of board wipe against aggro decks. But this is a card that, while it's going to be good in certain matchups, it's probably a card that's going to come out during sideboarding in a handful of matchups. Okay, time to talk about our removal package, which we are a Golgari mid-range deck, so we have a lot of removal. So first off, we have 3 copies of Cut Down, so 1-mana instant, destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. This is one that we could maybe run a full 4 of, not sure, but it's going to be really good against aggro decks, probably good against a decent amount of mid-range decks as well, but going to be really bad against, like, you know, Domain Ramp and stuff like that. Bitter Triumph, 2-mana removal, destroy target creature or planeswalker, but at additional cost we have to pay 3 life or discard a card. But the fact that it's flexible, there are planeswalkers we'll want to remove, and we have other creature removal, so we can usually come out feeling pretty okay with either of those alternative costs. We also have 3 copies of Go for the Throat. This is another one that we could maybe run a 4th copy of, but we'll see. Destroy target non-artifact creature. That's just going to be good most of the time. There are artifact creatures, there are artifact decks in Standard, but for the most part, this is going to kill almost anything at 2-mana instant speed. We also have Shoot the Sheriff, which is quite similar. We have 2 copies of it. Destroy target non-outlaw creature. Those are going to be assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. I thought about throwing a 3rd one of these in the sideboard, but we will see. I'm not sure how much this is going to be. I think overall it's not as good as Go for the Throat, but it's hard to say. As the format continues to change and evolve, I could see it becoming better or worse. We will see. We also have 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy. These are just a 2-mana catch-all. Yes, this is not the one that's technically Standard legal, but it was reprinted in Murders at Karlov Manor. So it is Standard legal. I destroy any permanents, but they get to go find a basic land to put onto the battlefield. So there is a little bit of a downside, but it is a 2-mana instant, destroy anything. So that's pretty dang good. We also have a singleton copy of Liliana of the Veil. Probably doesn't need to be here, but I've never got to play Liliana, and the Jund player in me wants to give it a try, so we're going to do that. That's one of our other cards that can cause a little bit of discard to help out the Hostile Investigator, and also if it gets to stick around, we might get some extra use out of it as well. The +1 actually probably doesn't hurt us as much. We have a decent amount of card advantage. We are a little bit of the grindier deck, so if we get to the mid to late game, Liliana is actually pretty good, and we can tear our opponent's hands apart. We also have Deadly Cover-Up and Gix's Command. We have 1 of each in the main board, and then we have 2 more Deadly Cover-Ups in the sideboard, and 1 more Gix's Command in the sideboard as well. Deadly Cover-Up is a 5-mana sorcery that says destroy all creatures, so it's a board wipe, but we may collect Evidence 6, which just means exile cards from our graveyard with a total mana value 6 or greater, and if we do that, we exile a card from an opponent's graveyard, then search their graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So if there's anything specifically scary from our opponent that we really need to make sure, maybe they have some kind of combo, maybe they're a Reanimator deck, something like that, that's a really good option to just make sure we get rid of more of the threats in their deck. And then Gix's Command is a 5-mana sorcery, and we get to choose 2 modes. One mode is put 2 +1/+1 counters on up to one target creature, gains life leak until end of turn. Destroy each creature with power 2 or less, so board wipe for aggro decks. Return up to 2 creature cards from our graveyard to our hand, and each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among creatures they control. So very modal. It's going to be very flexible. It's just the one of in the main board because I feel like it's one of those cards that in certain matchups is going to be good. It's not going to be good in all matchups, so we'll just have the one of here. We have one more on the sideboard. And then let's go ahead and talk about the mana base. So nothing too special. We got a lot of dual lands. We have a playset of Blooming Marsh, which are the fast lands. We have a playset of Lion War Waste, which are always going to enter untapped. They can tap for colorless, or they can tap for one of our colors to deal a damage to us. Most of the time, we're not going to have to deal damage to us, but it's nice to have the option if we need to. We also have a playset of Restless Cottage. This is a creature land, along with Mosswood Dread Knight. This is the other card that I said is super important to the deck. You can pay 4 mana to turn into a 4/4 until end of turn, and when that creature attacks, we create a food token and exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So it's a little bit of hate against our opponent's graveyards, and it's also going to create food tokens, which should gain us some life, which will help balance out some of the other cards in our deck. So especially when we get to the mid to late game, very important. We also have 2 copies of the Golgari Surveil land. Not sure how good these are going to be in this deck. We don't have any specific synergies with Surveil. We don't have anything that fetches these out, so the fetchable types doesn't really matter. It's just a tap land, it's a dual land, but it's going to give us a little bit of card selection, so I figured it was worth trying a couple. We also have 2 copies of Demolition Field. These are just a good way to make sure that if our opponent is playing pesky creature lands, we can get rid of them. And then we just have a couple forests and I think 6 swamps, and that's going to round out our mana base. So talking sideboards real quick. So after game 1, what are we switching out against certain matchups? So like I said, we have a couple more copies of Deadly Cover-Up if we feel like we need more board wipes. We have another copy of Gix's Command. That's going to be good in a handful of situations just because it's so flexible. We have 3 copies of Duress, 1 mana sorcery, get rid of one of our opponent's non-creature, non-land cards. Mostly going to be good against control, but I could see the argument for bringing it in against a few other decks as well. Should be pretty good in a few matchups. So we also have a playset of Soul Guide Lantern, which is going to 1 mana enters and exile a card from our opponent's graveyard, and then we can tap it to exile their whole graveyard, or we can pay 1, tap it to draw a card. So it's going to be good just to help churn through our deck, but mostly we're going to be playing it against Reanimator decks or decks that specifically want or care about things in their graveyards. Moving on, we have 2 copies of Frankwell Frillback. When it enters, we can pay a green to destroy an artifact or enchantment, exile a target player's graveyard, or gain 4 life, and we can do that up to 3 times. So it's going to be good in quite a few matchups. I feel like maybe the gain life is going to be good against aggro. Maybe if our opponent's playing artifacts and enchantments, that mode's going to be good. Graveyard decks, maybe that's good there. So it's going to be good in a lot of matchups. It's also just another body that we could get into our deck if we feel like we just need a larger mass of creatures, which could happen. We also run a singleton copy of the End. Costs 2 less to cast if our life total is 5 or less, and we exile a target creature or planeswalker, search their controller's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as the permanent exile this way. And then they shuffle and draw a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So it's pretty similar to the Deadly Cover-Up clause. We just feel like if we need a little bit more of that ability, we have it. And then finally, we have 2 copies of Terror Sunder, which is a 1 and a green instant to exile an artifact or enchantment, which is obviously going to be good against artifact enchantments decks, but it has kicker for 1 and a black, so a total of 4 mana. We can exile any non-land permanents. And that's my current Golgari mid-range standard deck. So I'm going to go play it, and I will be back in a few minutes with anything that I learned, as well as any upgrades I might want to do before hopping into the Sword Championship of mine in a couple weeks. So be right back.
A few moments later.
Okay, so that was a lot of fun. It was a small turnout. They are expecting more for the actual championship, but for the one that was today and the one that's next Saturday, small turnout. So I didn't get to GM too many games, but I did learn a few things. First of all, Preacher, best card in the deck, debatably. So the one of I have is not going to suffice. I'm going to have to hopefully find a couple of them in my local LGSs. If not, maybe I can expedite ship one from TCG Play or something. I don't know. And then also my land count is a little on the low side. I meant to mention this earlier there. You can find the deck list I'm currently running and the deck list that I'm hoping to upgrade to. You can find both of those in the description of this video, but I feel like 24 lands, a little on the low side. We're gonna up it. We're gonna add 2 Fable Passages into the deck just to get a little bit, a couple extra lands in the deck. And Kaervek, he's not making the cut. He's not surviving the cut of the final version. I thought he might be good just because there's a lot of removal in the deck, give me a little extra value, but he got sideboarded out, I think, every game I played. So yeah, that's where I'm at. But hey guys, Standard, it's really fun. It's really cool. If I feel like it's necessary, I might do a follow-up video after my store championship. But yeah, that's my Standard deck tech, what I think, and I encourage you guys, check out when your guys' local game stores are doing their Standard showdowns. It's gonna be a lot of fun. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.